back, we continue our analysis of Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's maiden budget speech this afternoon. We can speak now to Economist Dr Thabi Leoka, who's joining us from Johannesburg. A very good evening to you, Doctor, and welcome to the program. The IFP's Mkhuleko Hlengwa, in his response, or reaction at least, to the budget, said that it lacked detail and didn't flow. Did you get the sense that it was a solid budget that made sense for the South African context?
I absolutely did, and I think that the National Treasury had a very difficult task, and I'm really impressed with the outcome, given that before the budget, everyone wanted a piece of it. You know, the left, education, people who work in, the SAPS, the South African Defence Force, everyone wanted a bit of the expenditure. And I think that the minister and his team did very well in allocating resources.
And he seems to be continuing the tough talk position from the previous finance minister, Tito Mboweni, on the issue of state-owned enterprises. And he did mention tough love with a giggle when it came to that section of the speech. But can government really afford to say that, as a certainty, we're no longer going to see bailouts for our SOEs?
I think we can ill afford bailouts for SOEs. The reason why many departments and many programs didn't get the money in previous years was because money was then taken from these departments and also taken from these programs into state-owned entities. And that's why many people, assume that there's been austerity measures. And actually, we didn't have an austerity budget. What happened is that a National Treasury took money out of critical areas in the budget, and in order for them to save some of these SOEs like SAA, SA Express, Denel, and Eskom. And I think that he's right in saying, look, this is tough love. There are options that can be considered. For instance, we can sell some of these non-performing assets. We can also list some of them. There's an option of listing. And those that are critical for development, such as Eskom, I don't think that you can privatize it. But that should be funded, but in a way that doesn't compromise economic growth. And
you've been in a position, yes, you're an economist, but you also were on the board, I recall, at SA Express for a bit of time. During your time there, from your assessment, is the issue really about who is running the entities, or is the business model itself what is fundamentally the cause of why so many of them are struggling still to turn the corner?
It's a bit of both. So when we were appointed after massive corruption in these state-owned entities. And so there were two choices. Either the board would decide to sell these entities, find an equity, or three options: sell the entity, find an equity partner, or actually get it listed if possible. And actually we decided as the board at that time is that we're going to find an equity partner, which we did. But that wasn't what the state wanted at that time. And so the dilly-dallying then, cost, I guess, an entity, and therefore the entity then, defaulted and was insolvent. The other thing is that we also, I guess, another option would have been to inject money into an SOE after, massive corruption and mismanagement. But the problem with doing that was that you were going to do it at the cost of their economy. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have to steal from some of the, critical programs into funding a state-owned entity where we weren't even 100% sure that the entity would then, fly and also pay taxes and not need the government in future. So it was a very difficult position that many of our, the boards at that time found themselves in. And I think part of it is that you need a decisive government, a government that has a clear policy on what should happen with these state-owned entities. If you don't have a clear policy and you're basically just allowing them to operate with the same, staff component, and they're underperforming, then you're basically running these entities to the ground.
Mm-hmm. You talk about staff and the spending on that. Government is still sitting today with a question mark around what it's going to do about the public sector wage bill. We know that unions have made it clear, that they don't want any job cuts in the public sector, how does government then come up with a solution, a plan that keeps everyone happy to a degree? Because ultimately, not everyone will be entirely happy.
I find it quite astonishing because if you look at the landscape, especially when you ask people around whether they've received bonuses or increases during the past 2 years, many people haven't. And so, then you have the state and public sector employees represented by their unions requesting higher pay, which is not affordable. If you look at wage increases, or at least the wage bill, it is the fastest growing line item in the budget, in the expenditure. So it doesn't make sense that we have this increasing wages in a time where, as an economy, we are in a very precarious position.
Let's talk about the people who don't have work in this country, the poor. The Finance Minister today is saying over 46% of South Africans are being paid some sort of grant to get by. That is ultimately what underlines, what highlights the level, the extent of this country's unemployment problem. And I wonder if what was announced today speaks adequately to the urgency of addressing that.
I think it's a short-term solution, and I'm okay with that. But that doesn't solve the long-term problem of unemployment. If you ask many people who are unemployed, if you ask many young people who are unemployed, they are not satisfied with getting 350, whether it is for 1 year or 5 years. They want jobs, they want to be skilled, they want to ensure that their salary increases every year, they want to tease local government. How come that road that the minister spoke about is not being developed in my region? These are the questions that people need to ask, and that's why the budget needs to be very, a piece of document that needs to reach everyone and be understood by everyone. And I'm hoping that in future, at least the speech could be translated in many other, of our languages, so that people can understand what is due to them, what, their contribution towards the fiscus allows for them in terms of their livelihoods, and what also the promises that have been made by government, what it actually means to their livelihoods. So I think, people need to hold their officials accountable, and if they're not satisfied, they need to vote them out.
And over the medium term, 76 billion rand has been allocated by government to job creation programs. A, is it enough? B, do we have accurate enough feedback and reporting by government on how that money is actually being spent and the return on investment?
The problem with government is that it's not very good at actually talking about the stuff that they do. There are, successful programs, but there are also a lot of unsuccessful programs. And they need to also do a review. And I hope that the next, let's say, State of the Nation address is also a bit of a review to say, this is what we said we would deliver. This is where we missed out. This is how we want to remedy that. And so I think, to answer your question directly, short term it is sufficient, but again, these are not long-term solutions.
Dr. Thabi Leoka, good to speak to you as always. Thank you very much for your time today.